Here we go. Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is your host, Webster G. Tarpley, Ph.D., speaking from Washington, D.C., and it is the afternoon of Friday, April 27th, 2018, and we're getting towards the end of the cruelest month. Yes, according to some, April is the cruelest month, and for Trump, it has been, if not the cruelest, at least a remarkably cruel month. And a lot of his woes, as we will see, are self-inflicted. Now, our epigraph, our relevant quote to begin our program is, "We're running out of time. We're running out of time. You must have a million things to do." You must have a million things to do. And by the way, I'm not your doctor. Now, these words represent an attempted brush-off, and it turned into a successful brush-off of Trump by the three protagonists of Fox and Friends, that is Ducey, Kilmeade, and the lady in between, Allison, I think her name is. They had invited Trump on the air. This has not been done in many months. The pitfalls are many. And after about half an hour, they began to get noticeably nervous because, of course, they were witnessing Trump talk himself into impeachment or indictment or who knows what else. We can see that Trump, for the purposes of this interview, had retreated into a mental bunker. And out of this bunker, hunkered in the bunker, we could hear the voice of a very unstable person. The tone, above all, was frantic. It was agitated. It was extremely stressed. And it amounted to a river of grievance, a river of complaining. If you get to be president, you get to occupy the White House and Air Force One, isn't that the time to dial back the victimhood and the complaining and the whining? No. And that is the strange model. You want to be totalitarian, dictator, tough guy? Well, then you got to stop whining. These two just don't mix. And I've been trying to point this out for quite a while. A lot of people didn't understand, but this is the idea. You can't be a totalitarian, dictatorial, tough guy and also whine and complain that the world is not treating you fairly. No. So at the end of this, I'll just give you the view from a relatively intelligent ruling class position. General Barry R. McCaffrey, 4 stars, drug czar, wrote on Twitter, "Worried about health of President Trump." And yes, he means mental health. Chief of Staff John Kelly needs to get him offline and get a week rest. Trump needs a vacation, but he needs something more than a vacation. He needs to be hospitalized, is what McCaffrey is actually saying. Phone call to Fox News, very troubling. Has 3 years left in office. POTUS has immense legal authority. An unstable prez is not good for the American people. Absolutely correct. This McCaffrey distinguishes himself quite frequently as a relative voice of reason in this cacophony of the cacistocracy, the lunatic voices of a regime gone mad. Now, this was supposed to be a relaxed conversation. Some commentators have noted that when Trump thinks he can relax and let his hair down, he lets it all hang out, and that turns out to be, well, some kind of insanity. According to Heilman of MSNBC, what you saw there was a manic episode. This is close to calling it a psychotic episode. Clearly unstable. What did we hear? Well, we were told that he's being persecuted. Don, of course, being persecuted by a witch hunt, by the corrupt and evil figures of the FBI, by Comey, and by others. All the time, it sounded for all the world like sports talk radio.
Hey, this is Don from Jamaica, and I think the Mets stink. I like the Yankees better.
And on and on and on. Time is running out. We don't have much time left. We're running out of time, said Ducey at one point. Ducey used to be the weatherman around here in Washington. He was on the local Channel 5, meaning the Fox broadcast network, right? The one that competes in the broadcast realm, not Fox Cable News Channel. No, just normal local. And look, Ducey has done well for himself. He's got himself in there on Fox in the morning. His son has been hired. It's something, right? Only a few have been able to do that over the years, and there he is. So, as Trump says,
no collusion with me.
No collusion, no collusion. And he says he's scandalized by what's going on in the Department of Justice, and he's going to get them later. I'm going to let that go for a while, but I'll get back to them. So the voice out of the bunker. He says concerning Cohen that he's essentially signaling a growing chill in their interpersonal relations, if any, since that very dangerous phone call. What's the point of risking things with a phone call if you're going to turn against the guy later? But anyway, Don from Jamaica says he's not involved. He's going to get them later. So with that tone, you can see where we're going. There were complexes about, obviously, the Russiagate investigation, about Korea, diplomacy, very brief. The main thing is, though, that he can't argue in favor of any policies. What he argues for is a series of personal grievances. And on the basis of this well-known psychopathological phenomenon of introversion, he expects the people in the audience to share in his Mein Kampf, that is his efforts along the way to try to get justice for himself, not for anybody else, for himself. He accepts no responsibility. He does not regret anything. He confesses nothing. He apologizes for nothing. And he keeps ranting and raving. And after this went on for a while, it was clear, right? He had veered into the Electoral College compared to the popular vote of 2016, other sort of tried and true greatest hits, old chestnuts, evergreens, signature tunes. And you could see then the growing tension of Ducey and Kilmeade and others to the point where when Trump was complaining about how bad NBC was and how bad CNN was and which was worse, Kilmeade said, I'm not your doctor, but I would recommend that you simply stop watching those people and just watch us here. I'm not your doctor. Well, this is truly a ship of scruples. The United States is now being run by somebody of doubtful mental stability. Clear. Very troubling, as the distinguished General McCaffrey says. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. We always want to take as many opportunities as we can to invite you to go to AmericanSystem.tv, AmericanSystem.tv. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we're on the air at about 9 o'clock in the evening, internet radio, podcast. To get that podcast, go to www.americansystem.tv. Sign up. It's a mere bagatelle. And when that, you're going to keep up with all these things. This was another very, very fast-moving week. And, of course, you know that the only people who take the fifth are mobsters, right? Only crime bosses, only Gotti, only those guys. Joe Bananas, and so forth, right? Appalachian, New York, those guys. They take the fifth. Oh, my heavens. Wait till he rationalizes his own exercise of these key rights of non-incrimination. Don, he's burning his bridges with Cohen. It's a shame, but it's uncontrollable. It's a softball interview. In other words, it's planned to be a softball interview. It's planned to gratify Trump, his insatiable demand for adulation. But again, once you put him into that format where there are no rules, no text, there's not a topic, there's nothing. And indeed, this Doocy and Kilmeade actually asked him questions which were not clever, right? Watch the interview. They say to him, how much work did Cohen do for you? What proportion of your legal work was done by Cohen? That's a disaster. And then in the middle of that, he says, yes, Cohen was my lawyer on this crazy Stormy Daniels stuff. So, yes, he's my lawyer, but no, only a tiny amount. So you've generated problems by saying, yes, I knew all about it, this is my lawyer, and then you've generated problems for Cohen. So one of the things that Stalin was famous for was his ability to keep silent, to say nothing. And that would have been a great thing. But, of course, for this character, it's too late. It's not going to be remedied. And naturally, this was not a cross-examination. This was not a presidential debate or anything. So we're told now, of course, there's no collusion with me. With me? What does that mean? Well, there might be collusion with Manafort or Kushner or who knows who else, right? Or Flynn, Cohen. But not me. So that's our situation. It's very interesting, according to some of these commentators, that if Trump had a theme in this appearance, Fox and Friends Thursday morning, you can get it. It's about half an hour, worth listening to, if you still have illusions about Trump, that the 25th Amendment now comes into play. The commentators have said if there was a theme of this, it was to stimulate interest in mental health and mental instability or psychic problems, to be mentally disturbed, because that's what it sounds like. And, of course, according to some, it's a manic episode. To some, it's a rage fit, and there are other sorts of variations, right? Threats are included, innuendo. I think he might have been on a kind of speakerphone, although I'm not sure. The sound was not good. That actually added to the disturbing quality of this. There are always threats, of course, thrown in. So that's where we stand. Now, it's ironic that in that very same week, we saw the dramatic presentation of the workings of the 25th Amendment on the Homeland series. The Homeland series, which you can find on cable television. Showtime, is it? Something like this. The Homeland series, we actually had the implementation of the 25th Amendment by a duped and misguided Congress against a mentally semi-unstable president. So it's President Keene, some kind of a left-of-center Democrat. if you will. But in the course of the episode, it had begun in the previous week, but in this one on Homeland, we see the vice president come in saying, I'm here to relieve you. And then the president has got to leave the Oval and go and run the fight to prevent two-thirds majorities in each house of Congress from overthrowing the president. So if you want to get an idea, just go and look at, I think it's episode 10, episode 11 of Homeland, and you'll get a concrete example, although with the moral signs more or less reversed. In other words, in this case, it's a bunch of useful idiots duped by Russia against a president who is not very clever, but is attempting to save the U.S. In effect, the U.S. being under attack, which the leading impeachers or expellers of the president don't want to admit. Now, it's been a big week of diplomacy. We got to just say a couple of basic things about the world. The structure of the world since 1945, to the extent that progress has been available, largely, the central foundation of the world has been an alliance system centered on the U.S., and it has two wings. It has an eastern wing that is represented by Japan. We had Abe here 7 or 8 days ago, Prime Minister of Japan. He was given essentially no concessions. This was very foolish. Nothing that I could see forthcoming to help Abe against scandals and other things. By the way, now, whenever there are scandals, you always have to wonder, is that fake news? Is that active measures, Gerasimov doctrine, hybrid warfare? Out there in the Far East, of course, you've got arrayed around Japan, more or less. You've got Republic of Korea, South Korea. You've got Australia. You've got Taiwan. You've got some other countries. But the anchor out there is Japan. So make sure you hold on to Japan. In the other wing, the centerpiece is Germany. And we can treat Germany and France more or less as one unit, right? Under the de Gaulle-Adenauer arrangements, Germany and France are more or less acting in tandem. They certainly did during the Iraq war crisis, and they're doing so now. There's a division of labor. So today we had Merkel at the White House around the French-German Central Core. You've got the British bringing the Commonwealth with them. You got the Italians, very important for the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and the rest of NATO, Scandinavia, Iberia, and all the rest. But that's it. That's essentially the world that those are the forces that are going to lead humanity, I would say, out of the current crisis. There's a role for the initiatives of the developing countries, but a lot of them have been fatally weakened. So back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. World Crisis Radio. Once again, tune in Monday through Thursday at AmericanSystem.tv, AmericanSystem.tv, and you'll hear this analysis about 9 o'clock every evening. And we recommend that you do that because it's too much. We can't really do justice to all of it down in the 120 or so minutes that we have on a day like this. So what we've got to look at is the Japanese wing, the U.S. at the sort of the center, the linchpin of this, and the French-German wing in Europe. Now, of course, it is Russia which has taken on the task of busting up the European wing of NATO. In France, in Germany, in Italy, in Britain, this absurd and stupid Brexit movement fomented by fake news and funded by oligarchs. And then out there in the Far East, it's the Chinese. It's the friendly Xi dynasty, Xi who must be obeyed. And the question you have to ask yourself, right, is those are the three choices in the world. China and their system, Russia and their system, or the U.S. and the system that is centered on the countries that I've just mentioned. And you have to choose. Choose. Yes, choose. You, alt-left. You have to choose. And you can't get away from it, right? Because even if you pretend not to choose, as we know, even an existentialist knows that if you pretend not to choose, you're choosing. So you want China to break that up? China with the social credit system, the most comprehensive spying system the world has ever known. She's saying control of the internet is key to maintaining social stability. These are entities which have a failed formula of government, right? Tiananmen shows it. We can say, yeah, but the U.S. has blood on its hands. Well, China, they ran Pol Pot. Pol Pot was their guy. Pol Pot achieved the highest level of genocide of anybody in terms of percentage of the population, right? Cambodia had 4 or 5 million people. Pol Pot killed, 2 million? And then, of course, we have the situation with Russia. Well, without having to go back to Stalin, we didn't go back to Mao either, right? We could have gone back to Mao. Mao is the genocide champion of the world, right? 80 to 100 million killed in China under Mao. In the case of Stalin, it's only 10 to 20 million in. This is not the war. This is purges and related stuff. And, of course, in more recent years, under Yeltsin, we had the first and second Chechen war with thousands killed. According to some of these counts, 30, 40, 80,000 killed in Chechnya. So this is that's just the first one, right? Then there's a second one. So this is naturally, there's no moral superiority. And indeed, you also have to ask, which of these systems is susceptible to being corrected? Which one responds to, for example, a mass strike movement? I would argue that the U.S. is the classic land of the mass movements, from anti-war to civil rights to women's to labor. These are all typical U.S. phenomena, and therefore you have to say, essentially, when you look out over today, right, we got the teachers striking in Colorado, the teachers are striking in Arizona, after striking in West Virginia, in Oklahoma, and elsewhere. This is a system that can be reformed, in my view. I wouldn't give up on it, because the other ones, you tell me how you're going to reform the other ones, right? And most of us lived through an attempt to reform the Russian system back in the early 1990s. Did not work. So there's where we are. Now, in terms of the Far Eastern wing of this, right, focused on Japan, secondarily focused on Korea, very important, and the challenge there is from China. But China is working with this gambit, right? This Trojan horse or proxy asset, whatever you want to call it, North Korea and their dictator Kim. Now, we've just had a meeting, right? Nothing wrong with meetings, I guess. What's wrong is the hype. So here we have Kim of North Korea and Moon of South Korea meeting on the line of demarcation. What is that? The 45th parallel, more or less, and the peace village of Panmunjom. And this is a Korea summit. It's the third, I believe, since the Korean War ended in 1953. That's fine. Jar Jar is better than war, except if it's going to be a mini Munich. And I'm afraid that there are some signs, at least, maybe it's not conclusive. No, not conclusive. But that this is a mini Munich in the making. On the one side, we have the Honorable Kim. Trump, of course, fulfills Leibniz's definition of bad immediacy, right? What it means to be immediate in the sense of non-reflective and having no sense of context or even the recent past, right? As Leibniz put it, mens momentanea seu carens recordationem. a mind which is in the moment and totally lacking in memory. That's there are other terms for this, right? Some of them, sometimes it's called bad immediacy or something like this. So Trump has now promoted Kim to the status of the Honorable Kim after having him as Rocket Man, a suicide mission, and so forth, fire and fury during last summer, having gotten as much mileage out of that as he can. And, of course, Trump now is desperate. He is desperate for some kind of success. All of the signs now point to a Republican catastrophe in the November election. Deserve it. We say, let it be a step on the way to the extinction of this odious and anti-national political formation, right? It has outlived its outlived its uselessness, to say nothing of its usefulness. And it's better for this thing to have end up with dignity. Go the way of the Whigs, go the way of the know-nothings, go the way of the Federalists. That's the nicest thing we can say to the Republicans. And we're sick and tired of the prating and babbling about bipartisanship in the media. We don't want bipartisanship. We want the end of the Republicans. Then, when the Democrats split into two parts, the pro-labor part and the pro-financier part, then between those two, there you could have an attempt for cooperation. But with these Republicans, it's just impossible. Piece of evidence came in today. The majority report of the House Intelligence Committee. Oh my God, they must have gotten Ian Fleming or somebody like this, right? Maybe John le Carré, right? The midnight rider that came in from the cold. That would be Nunez. So anyway, we're talking about the need to shore up this alliance and to understand the mechanisms that are being used to try to break it up. And that's what this mini Munich is. The mini Munich in the Far East is an attempt to bust the U.S. away from Japan and from South Korea. Exactly how, we'll tell you more about it in a second. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Once again, it's the 27th already of April, and we're coming to you from Washington, D.C. Now, the Chinese goal is to break up this eastern wing of the U.S.-centered alliance of nominally, formally, sometimes substantially democratic countries, and then the Russians take care of busting up Europe. That's more or less it. And again, you got to choose, right? You want to choose the Chinese totalitarian model? You want to choose the Russian oligarchical totalitarian model? I don't think so. We can call the Chinese the legalist totalitarians, because that's their origin. But now, the way that this is supposed to turn out, the Chinese goal, of course, is to kick the U.S. out of the Far East. Right? That's their goal, always has been. Going back to the warnings we saw from General MacArthur in his 1951 speech to the joint session of Congress. So here's how this is supposed to work. Kim is trying to sound reasonable. He's trying to make nice with Moon. Moon is someone who desperately relies on signs of détente, of rapprochement, of essentially humanitarian measures between the two Koreas. And to the extent that Kim is now the more conciliatory to Moon, this is trying to pull Moon towards Kim, even though, of course, we look at the Korea statement of today, and we will see this is nothing but vague platitudes. This is pious wishes, pious hopes. This is essentially a kind of a paternoster of wishes and so forth, but nothing realistic, and it doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you what is nuclearization, how might it be achieved. It's just, we're so happy that we've now decided to get along. Now, similar statements have been issued in 1972, in 1991, in 1992, in Audi in 2000, in 2004. The 1992 one led more or less to this thing called the Agreed Framework, which was betrayed not just by North Korea, but also by the U.S. under the Clinton regime. A commitment was made to provide light water reactors, but then by the time we got post-00, Bush and the neocons were in there, and the neocons, people like Bolton, broke it up. So that's what's going on out there. Concerning Japan, right? Again, Trump's stupidity, his tone deafness, especially when dealing with people from the Far East, right? You have to remember that everything is by indirection. Everything is behind screens, indirect statements, suggestions, nothing blunt. And, of course, the world of the rent-gouging Queen's landlord is anything but this. So Trump is psychologically very poorly suited to the niceties of statesmanship and diplomacy in the Far East, right, in the Confucian civilizations. This is just not his world. So that's the problem that we're going to have there. It's a bunch of platitudes. Now, with the Japanese, obviously, they say, you want to limit ICBMs, yes, but please let's worry about the intermediate range ballistic missiles that can go from North Korea to hit Japan. And so far, they're not getting much to show for it. So the idea would be that China might gain because they're now seen as the protectors of North Korea. They're the sponsors, along with Russia. Remember, the founder of the Kim dynasty served in the Red Army, the Soviet Red Army in the Far East, right? When the Japanese attacked Korea, I think he was part of that. When Japan, in other words, they were attacking Japan and Manchuria and then eventually into Korea. So that's the danger out there. That's what you're going to get. Now, of course, Trump can't keep a thought in his head for more than just a few minutes, and he is now alternating between euphoria and a kind of, gangster realism in his tweeting, and he's claiming, he says that the U.S. governments in the past have been played by Kim, but he would never let that happen to him. But of course, that does seem to be what he's doing. Kim is playing on the inherent structural problem of a politician under a democratic system, is that you've got to talk a bit about what you're doing, and when you do that, public opinion gets to be interested in it, and before you know it, there's a public expectation that demands that what you begin in these ways also be brought to fruition, right? That this somehow yield results. So that once you start it, you're under enormous pressure to continue it. And that is dangerous, right? And of course, with somebody like Trump, the Trump administration has only one purpose. It is to magnify the prestige of Trump. It's all about Trump, right? What does narcissism look like at the level of a government? It's a government that is based on the prestige of the head of state or the head of government. And once he thinks that his prestige is somehow invested in this, then he feels that he's got to carry it through. So this is, he's giving collateral thanks to Xi. Let's not forget a great help I got from my good friend, President Xi of China. What a fool. What a fool. With friends like this, Don, you don't need enemies. And he's saying, he's doing such a great job at the border. I'm sure the missile components and the A-bomb, H-bomb components are going across that border even more quickly, right? Maybe they've got a tunnel. And here, this morning, Korean War to end, all caps, exclamation point. The United States and all of its great people should be very proud of what is now taking place in Korea. After a furious year of missile launches and nuclear testing, a historic meeting between North and South Korea is now taking place. Good things are happening, but only time will tell. Well, that's about 90% hype and only 10% caution. By the way, since we always catalog his mistakes, it's an historic meeting in good American anyway. I don't know where he learned, but that's fundamental. All right, so this is the situation. Right? Trump is this is why this meeting should not occur. Because if he goes in there, he's going to be invested. If he goes to a meeting, doesn't matter where it is, there's going to be hype. He's going to then feel that he's got to get something out of it. If Kim chooses that point to pull the football away, Lucy with the football, then Trump is going to be apoplectic and he's going to go on rampage. And who's going to pay with their lives for that? Will it be you? Will it be you? Will it be you? Could be any of us. All right. Now, attempts from Europe, right? Europe has some insight, right? Europe realizes that it cannot be self-governing. That's the long and the short of it, right? The two world wars, the interwar period, and so forth. Europe by itself is ungovernable because of many factors. So in this case, the U.S. actually is indispensable in terms of the cohesion of Europe. And the European Union came about because the U.S. wanted it. It was promoted by the State Department for decades. I've seen it. I've been through it. So let's look then at Macron and Merkel when we come. Second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is our edition recorded on Friday, the 27th of April. And we're going to talk about the Macron visit and then a few words about Merkel, and then on we go to other issues. However, first, this coming Monday is Walpurgisnacht. It's April 30th. That's Walpurgisnacht, especially Northern Europe, Scandinavia, Northern Germany, places like this. It is, at least in theory, a Christian saint's day, right? There is this, we're assured, Saint Walpurga living around 750 AD, and she was made a saint around 870. So it's the day before May Day. It's a spring festival. However, it's also a witches' Sabbath. And in particular, the folk legends are that all the witches go to this mountain called the Blocksberg, the Blocksberg Mountain, otherwise known as the Brocken, B-R-O-C-K-E-N. Where is that? Well, if you go from, Cologne and, Dusseldorf, and you go sort of northeast, it's about halfway to Berlin along that route, and it's a little bit south of Hanover, right? A little bit southwest of Hanover. So this is the highest mountain in the Harz mountain chain, the highest in northern Germany, right? There are higher ones in the Alps, of course, but this is the highest. So that's where they meet. And, of course, this is also the day when Hitler committed suicide, right? This is Hitler's death day. So we've just had Hitler's birthday on the 20th of April, celebrated by neo-Nazis, alt-right, narcotics enthusiasts of various kinds. And now we're going to have this other anniversary. Why did he do it? Hitler was, of course, a raving irrationalist, a raving occultist, and he thought that by leaving this earth in the midst of this witches' Sabbath, he could somehow be caught up in the flow of, evil energy into the cosmos and quite possibly control his own reincarnation. So that's where we're going. Let's be looking carefully at the regime here on Monday, April 30th, to see anything unusual. And is this a nod to, is it a dog whistle for the enthusiasts of the Walpurgisnacht? All right, so let's go through what French President Macron had to say, because this is a very interesting speech, right? For a lot of us, the visit was mostly a series of what can we say? Sort of cheap theatrical poses of backslapping, hand-holding, kissing, dandruff plucking, and so forth. But you can see what he's doing, and it's an honorable enterprise, right? As much as I'm sure it's distasteful for him as anybody else. Now, in terms of Macron, before we say anything else, Macron has some insights into the importance of civilization. However, he is a banker. He's better than Marine Le Pen, 1,000,000 times better. Marine Le Pen is the wiping out of civilization in much of Europe and the world. Macron is not that. Macron is the usual kind of guy, right? Pompidou was run by the Rothschilds. Maybe Macron is run by the Rothschilds. But there are things that are a whole lot worse, and you can only act out within the framework of public opinion and various kinds of, sort of semi-democratic control. So that's what Macron is bringing. He's obviously got the idea that he has to come over here and do something to keep Trump from going off the deep end, if that's at all possible. We, of course, here have a different point of view. We want the ouster of this regime. From a foreign country, it's different because you've got immediate day-to-day problems that you've got to try to get through, avoiding the worst. So, on the whole, we're not against it. The problem with Macron is neoliberal economics, bankers' economics, monetarist economics, Milton Friedman, von Hayek, von Mises, the British Classical School, Ricardo, Mill, all those people, Jevons, all bankrupt, Adam Smith, all crazy. That's what he brings. And, of course, his regime has made itself relatively unpopular, despite his overwhelming wins, both in the presidency and the parliament, by his austerity policies. Austerity for pensioners, for students, hire and fire society, and so forth. And he calls that reform. Okay, having said that, there are still other issues. So what are the things that he said that were halfway decent? He says that freedom is only one generation, never more than one generation from extinction, that the Western civilization is at risk. Western values are at risk. That anger and fear have gripped both sides of the Atlantic. You can't build anything on anger and fear. Roosevelt rightly told Americans and the world, 1933, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Isolationism, withdrawal, and nationalism are blind alleys. The world will not stop, and its risks will then multiply for you. He insists on calling this a liberal order because of the stuff that I've just said. Let's call it a form of civilization post-World War II. He warns against the illusion of nationalism. Yes. He wants a new or strong multilateralism. The U.S. invented it. Why don't you claim it? He wants human rights and minority rights based on education against ignorance, development, good faith, culture, medicine, science against fanaticism, and so forth. There should not be a massive deregulation. There should be an intelligently regulated market economy. No trade wars, fair trade, fine. Work through the World Trade Organization, change the rules. There should be digital rights. We have to protect the middle class because these are the backbone of democracy. He wants the U.S. to rejoin the Paris Accords. We've said here repeatedly, it would cost the U.S. nothing to rejoin the Paris Accords, since there's nothing specific in it that you have to do. just say, I'm part of it, I'm a good guy. Right now you're letting Xi, the greatest polluter in the world, is able to pose as the great friend of nature. That's Xi. What a hypocrite. That's a new low in hypocrisy. He talks about the shared burdens that are going on in various places, Africa, Mali, and so forth. Fight fake news. It corrodes democracy. Fight terrorist propaganda. Fight nuclear proliferation. No nukes for the North Koreans. Try to deal with that. For Iran, he says you've got to keep the Iran nuclear accord. This is the purpose of the trip. The JCPOA must be maintained. We signed it. We cannot simply walk away from it. We need better monitoring, all kinds of improvements, but you can't throw away something that has been achieved without having a better alternative. Somebody hurry and tell Trump that you don't just cut off your nose to spite your face. U.S. and France jointly acting in a number of places in the world. Of course, going back to Lafayette, we are here, and the original Lafayette. General de Gaulle had addressed the Congress in April of 1960, 58 years ago, and de Gaulle said that for France the most important thing is the relation with the United States when all is said and done. Macron talks in terms of high ideals, humanitarianism, progress, the call of history, courage. You ever heard any of that from Trump? I don't think so. So, in many ways, culturally very interesting, and really a polemic against Trumpism, against what this MAGA regime is supposed to stand for, right? In its twilight now, in its failures. Back in a minute on World Crisis. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So that was Macron. Macron also had to balance himself back towards a critical position. In France, of course, Trump is held in contempt. I think he's got 10% popularity. In France, on the other hand, it's not an active, what can we say? It's a kind of a passive, resigned dislike. I can remember the French saying that Ronald Reagan was a stupid fascist, and that there were other kinds of fascists that might be worse. They had a point, right? They had a lot going for them with that analysis. The difference is, in Germany, it's that people, I think, are horrified by Trump, and they're shocked, whereas the French are somewhat more blasé and cynical about it. So with that, we've come to the visit of Merkel, and Merkel is arguing essentially for the same thing. She says we've got to keep the Iran nuclear accord. That's the main thing. She says that Germany is going to bring the defense expenditure from 1.1% of GDP to 1.3% of GDP. She pledges to go further. Remember, it took her several months to form her government. It's not the most stable, but it's there. She made that 17 million GIs, 17 million U.S. soldiers have been stationed in Germany since World War II, since 1945. That is very, very interesting. Merkel has gotten the briefing on flattery. She tries to flatter Trump, but she can't go as far as Macron because her parliamentary system makes her weaker, and again because of this peculiarity of German public opinion. Right? This is a real horror because maybe the what can we say? The friendly feeling toward the U.S. was somewhat greater, perhaps, but then now it's in danger of turning into the opposite. So she does flatter, but it's kept within bounds. There's an attempt to show that everything is normal, that these are business-like contacts, right? That she has problems, she can get it done. German word for flattery, Schmeicheln. Schmeichel. So she can go in for that, but she can't go overboard. On the other hand, she's not going to get the chance to rebalance as she returns home. It would be interesting to, of course, to ponder the lessons from German history. This is, of course, a divided country from 1945 until 1990, 1991. It was divided. And those would be important lessons for Korea. Some of these things have been studied in the past, but they need to be studied continuously. So there's going to be a NATO summit in the summertime. And she wants, obviously, the U.S. to exempt Germany and Europe from the steel and aluminum tariffs. That would make a lot of strategic sense. What do you think the German military system is worth? What do you think the German railroad system is worth? What do you think that means in terms of advanced logistics for power projection around the world? If you don't understand that, you're just, belaboring the obvious, right? You're unfit for the office. So that was Merkel. We just hope it all goes off without some major incident. Trump did ostentatiously shake hands with Madame Merkel, although he also bored her with his stories about... We'll talk about his half signing. He was going to sign a deal for the moving of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, and he saw the price tag, and he stopped. He half signed. So he put Donald... And then, I don't know what he said then. Fake out! And then he refused to sign the rest of it. So the decree remained on his desk. So we also agree, keep the Iran nuclear deal. The alternatives are not worth it. You're not going to get people to come with you. You're going to destroy what's been accomplished, and it's just a piece of stupidity. We're told, by the way, that the new U.S. ambassador to Germany, Grinnell, is a creature of Bolton. Now, this brings us to our next department. This one is called, in honor of our German visitor today, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Yes, that's a horror movie. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, with apparitions and visions, and it's surreal, and it's a nightmare world. Okay, what do we have? First of all, Dr. Ronnie, that is to say, Admiral Jackson, has quit. He took his name out of the running, and Trump today said he's a great man, and that old John Tester out there in Montana is going to have to pay a terrible price. The issue here is privatization, and the question now is going to be, who should take the place of Dr. Ronnie as the candidate? And we have a candidate. We looked, by the way, at one candidate who is no good. We looked at this guy, Toby Conway, I guess his name is, from the Cleveland Clinic. No, not him. This is somebody who's attuned. Sorry, Toby Cosgrove. Toby Cosgrove, no. This is somebody who thinks that we should have fewer hospitals and fewer beds. We can't depend on the government, and that 20% of hospitals probably have to get lopped off. No. Of course, he says, don't worry if you have a heart attack. We have transportation that can get you to a hospital. That's your life is numbered in minutes. And the investment, think of what a human being costs. The investment of society in an educated adult is astronomical when you really add it all up. So they don't care about that. Our candidate, let's see if we can find his name. He's going to be in here somewhere. He's somebody who has already had the job. His name is McDonald. Yes, McDonald was the head of the Veterans Administration under Obama. This is a guy who was the head of Procter & Gamble. It's a businessman from the top level, from the top 20 corporations. He's asked, what do you think of privatization? Privatization is a bad idea. He says, people come up to me in various kinds of gatherings when I was head of the VA, and they'd say, this VA stinks. We've got to shut it down and privatize everything. Dumping 8 to 10 million vets into the overcrowded private insurance system. And he said, every time I asked him, I say, are you a vet? No. Are you an executive of a rival healthcare system? Yes. So it's all Koch. They want this. They're going to asset strip it. Think of all the real estate. Think of the building. The answer is no. We're on McDonald, right? Our candidate to be the head of the VA. And he said, if they call me, I'll pick up the phone. I'd be interested to talk to Trump and see what he wants to do. But if we could make our visions match, he would come back. Obviously, Trump forced him out. He wanted to stay. This is, again, it's a top He's from the number 17 corporation in the U.S., so he knows something. For this job, by the way, you need a medical background, you need a military background, and you need a big deal management background, ideally, right? Or on-the-job training, which this guy has had. So privatization is a bad deal. The achievements of the Veterans Administration. The Veterans Administration provides health care for about 9 million vets. It's one of the biggest systems in the world at that rate. And many of them, I think most surveys show that they are relatively happy with this. But there are always the splitters, the sowers of discord, the ones that are headed for the 8th circle of the inferno. And they try to make trouble because they want to break it up. They want to break it up, asset strip it, sell off the pieces, and loot it. That's the Koch formula. And every time you hear somebody, check their creds because it's going to turn out to be that. 70%, more than 2/3 of the doctors in the United States have been trained at some point in the Veterans Administration system. When you got to do your internship and so forth, complete your doctoral training, 70% go to the Veterans Administration. You got to do more in that department. We would need right now an infusion of 200,000 or 300,000 doctors, especially in these rural areas, right? High plains, southern mountains, places like this. Now, in terms of their other achievements, the implantable cardiac pacemaker is a product of the Veterans Administration. The notion of taking a baby aspirin once a day to prevent heart attack is a contribution of the Veterans Administration. He has what he calls a brain gate, I guess it's called. It's a chip. Yeah, it's a chip for your brain, and it allows you to control prosthetic devices. In other words, if you're paraplegic, heavy duty, you've got to be able to control these limbs, artificial limbs. They can do that now with the implanting of such a chip, and we'll leave the paranoid jokes to the libertarians. So therefore, he says, it's bad for the patients, for the veterans, it's bad for the society, and it should not be done. And he would be willing to come back. The Veterans Administration cooperates with 1,800 medical schools. This was a system set up by General Omar Bradley, the guy who saved the day at the Battle of the Bulge, right? The commander over Patton, the ground commander under Eisenhower in Europe. Okay, so I think that's important. So Jackson, but those are the criteria. We want McDonald for the administrator of the VA. Okay, now we have the EPA, right? The boss of the EPA. What can we call them? Nitwit, halfwit. They call him pre-wit. I guess pre-wit means they think he'll get a brain someday, but right now he doesn't have it, so he's pre-wit. He's not witting now, but they think he might be at some later point. If you watch this snake, this weasel, under attack from Republicans, yes, Republicans couldn't touch this guy. He is so smelly. He is an expert in evasion, double talk. He slithers, he slinks. He's a lounge lizard. I don't know who. If this is not the creature from the Black Lagoon in the swamp, I don't know who is. So he should be ousted. And then, of course, we have Mulvaney. Mulvaney with refreshing candor, right? This is the guy who's wrecking the consumer finance Protection Bureau in service of payday lenders and rip-off auto lenders. And he's also the chief austerity ghoul at the OMB. Mulvaney said, addressing an audience of bankers, guys, you want to do business with me and my operation, this administration, you've got to pay. I only talk to lobbyists if they've paid me. I want contributions. Even if you're a lobbyist, if you haven't made a contribution, go jump in the lake. So that's going to be bad. Then there's going to be this thing about Gina Haspel, the concentration camp commandant. I don't think we need the concentration camp commandants to take over the CIA. I think a lot of them, some of them want the CIA to become a kind of permanent storm cellar for all kinds of potentially criminal things done under the Bush administration. I don't know. Hasn't the statute of limitations run out? It's usually 5 years for the feds, isn't it? All right. So Trump, this is where Trump says, I don't want any BCD level people in my administration. Some say, so what do you want? You only want Class A felons or indeed Class A war criminals? Because that's what you seem to be. Where you seem to be gravitating. Now, Pompeo is in. This is another scandal. The Pompeo-Bolton, those are your two horsemen of the apocalypse, right? So you have Trump, Pompeo, and Bolton. Maybe if you had Haspel, you'd have the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And I'm not kidding. That's quite serious. Now, in terms of the other thing, the privatization of the VA is, of course, a monstrosity. I am looking, and I've got vigilance going here, the Postal Service. They want to privatize the Postal Service. That's lurking underneath. And by the way, everybody wants to be the head of the VA because they want to direct the breakup and asset stripping of the VA and get rich themselves in the process. It may come as a surprise, right? Trump is complaining about Amazon. We complain about Amazon too. But this obscures the fact that the Postal Service is profitable. The Postal Service has made a profit of about $1 billion in 3 of the past 4 years. No taxpayer money goes to the USPS Postal Service, not one thin dime. And they use their income to pay on their expenses. However, the reason that they have financial problems is what we call the Parthian shot from Hastert the Bastard. Here, this is the letter to the Washington Post. Frederick Rolando, the president of the National Association of Letter Carriers, therefore a public sector union, people that we intend to support, Congress in 2006 mandated that the USPS do something that no other entity, public or private, is required to do. The USPS was forced by Hastert the Bastard, I think he got out of jail now finally, to pre-fund the future retiree health benefits decades into the future. $5.8 billion per year in annual charges is the reason for the so-called losses of the USPS. So the Congress must address the illogical, insane pre-funding so that the USPS can continue to provide Americans and their businesses with the industrial world's most affordable delivery network. Yes, ever been in Japan, ever been in Germany or France or England? Look at the postal rates over there. They're sky high compared to this. The USPS is a great bargain. Just undo the Parthian shot of Hastert the Bastard, and things will be back on the right road. And we will be back in just World Crisis Radio. What is the great surprise, right? Dr. Ronnie, Admiral Ronnie, is known to imbibe, according to more than a score of eyewitness complaints about his antics. The guy drinks like a sailor. What can we tell you? He drinks like a sailor. So that's predictable. There was a government in Germany not so long ago that claimed it was going to last for 1,000 years. Dr. Ronnie was trying to promise 200 years. but it's not clear if he's going to be able to deliver on that. Now we got so much this week. Let me just tick off a couple of headlines, right? We've got, the twilight of Trump. We're in the twilight of Trump. Some people say they can see light at the end of the tunnel. I'm not sure. That may be too soon. We've got a big important meeting of evangelical fundamentalists. The Elmer Gantrys will be gathering towards the end of June. They just had a meeting at Wheaton College where there was a conflict between an anti-Trump group and a pro-Trump group. Traditional morality, of course, being on the side of the anti-Trump, but the pro-Trump being scandalized because they've thrown that out the window. That, of course, is the question of simony. And, simony. Let's just mention that. We have Ryan attempting, and I think succeeding. Ryan is trying to purge the chaplain, the religious chaplain of the House of Representatives. I think the guy's name is Conroy. He is a Roman Catholic. He is a Jesuit. And Conroy had dared to assert the traditional Christian social doctrine, the preferential option for the poor, the least of these, Matthew, the Beatitudes, and so forth, right? And what you do for them, you're doing for Christ. He went so far as to insert that, to inject that heresy, from Ryan's point of view, into one of his prayers in the House. The prayer in the House. So this was during the tax debate. And what did he say? I think we have a quote. The basic idea coming from Conroy was to say that when there are material rewards, these ought to be distributed equitably also among the little people, not just the rich and the powerful. And therefore, this was interpreted by Ryan as an implied criticism of the Republican tax scam. Now, Ryan, of course, is a follower of that notorious Russian fascist writer, Ayn Rand. And that's his belief structure. So this is a challenge to it, right? Because the Ayn Rand belief structure says if you're poor, it means you're bad, and you're oppressing the rich people who do all the work and develop all the wealth. You hear this, right? Who pays all the taxes? Well, the super rich. Well, yeah, but not enough to make that a justifiable statement. It's very misleading. So apparently Ryan fired Conroy, the Jesuit chaplain of the House of Representatives. The desire to make a chaplain into a megaphone for political party propaganda, that's an example of simony. So we congratulate Conroy for avoiding this trap of simony, because once again, the punishment for simony is in the eighth circle of Dante's Inferno. There's the eighth circle, of course, is it's deceit, and it's crevices in the rock with the sinners pounded in there. They're cooking below. Their feet stick out. The flames are burning on the soles of their feet, and there are quite a few popes. So good for Conroy. He escaped it, and good that he brought this up. Now, the twilight of Trump also includes this question of a post-Trump paradigm. That's what we're working on here increasingly. The post-Trump paradigm is, what's a reasonable package of economic policies, cultural policies, institutional reform, government reform, reform of the intelligence agencies, I think would be important in that. Other sorts of reforms, defense measures against hybrid warfare, against Xi, against the Gerasimov doctrine on the Russian side, and so forth. And we'll be delving into those. Now, the Homeland series, which we mentioned at the beginning, is coming to an end this weekend. In other words, the season finale, at least. to say no more than that. This is going to be, you can watch this on Sunday night. And we've just had a very interesting episode. Now, I don't want to do any spoilers on you here, but in the course of this episode, there are two things that have been criticized, and I wanted to discuss them. One is, in the course of this next to the last, penultimate episode this past weekend, available all this week, right? You can see it. And, of course, it's on demand if you have cable TV, which you have to have. So I think just about anybody can get it. There's violence. There's a fight between what amounts to the KGB and the GRU. And it is that the GRU has sent an agent to meddle in the U.S. That is this guy Gromov. He has gotten into trouble. He's had some success, but he's also gotten into trouble. The U.S. delegation goes to Moscow to try to bring back some witnesses whose testimony is needed. And what they do, in order to squeeze the head of the KGB, they drain his bank accounts. And he goes berserk, and he says, what do I have to do to get my money back? And the head of the National Security Council in this version, right, this guy Berenson, says, well, all you need to do is deliver to us the witness that we came here to get. So the KGB guy sends an armed company of troops to GRU headquarters and raids it. And there's shooting, killing, firearms, all sorts of stuff. Some people have said, but that's not realistic. That makes no sense. My dear friends, I was one of those who was in Moscow in 1993, to go no further back than then. I remember standing at the foot of the Russian White House, at that point the seat of the parliament, and the top 8 or 10 floors were blackened because this thing had been shot up by tanks. There were tanks from the Taman division, came halfway across the bridge over the Moskva River, I think, and let fly, right, with their 80 or 90 or 110 millimeter cannons, and shot up and burned the entire top floor of the Parliament building. And there was a lot of shooting going on. There were several days, and this was October 1993, I think, or was it October 1992? Anyway, you get the idea. This was the fight between the vice president, Rutskoy, and the president of the Supreme Soviet, Khasbulatov, against Yeltsin. U.S. was backing Yeltsin, but of course the Democratic side was actually the Rutskoy-Khasbulatov faction. So this led to street fighting in Moscow. I remember being there. They declared a curfew, Komandansky Chas. That's the curfew. And you couldn't go out after a certain time of night because there were supposedly snipers on rooftops that were killing people. Now, I don't know what to make of the details of that. But that was shooting in downtown Moscow, in the government building, in a very recent time. So that would be number one. You can also go back to the August 2 of 1991, led by Yanayev and Khrushchev tried to overthrow Gorbachev. The other one that they said was unrealistic was, would a member of the U.S. Congress betray an ongoing U.S. covert operation for political advantage? And in this movie, there's a guy called Senator Sam Paley who does just that. And the answer to it is, you think that's realistic? My answer is one word: Nunez. Would Nunez do it? I don't know, but ponder that one. So that's going to be it for our World Crisis Radio this week, and we will be seeing you on Monday on The American System, www.americansystem.com.